California sells a very specific dream. Golden light, tech money, avocado toast with a view of the Pacific, the fifth largest economy on the planet. A state so wealthy it could fund most countries and still have change left over. And then there are the other Californias, the ones nobody's selling. We're not talking about neighborhoods with bad commutes or towns with one Yelp-reviewed diner. We're talking about places where 1 in 4 children have been diagnosed with asthma before their 5th birthday, where the tap water has been killing people slowly for decades, where the ground was poisoned for 93 years straight and the cleanup is still not finished, where an entire community founded by freed enslaved people as a utopia was deliberately sold land with no future and then handed arsenic in the wells for good measure. One town on this list held celebrity yacht parties in the 1960s. Today, the shore smells like a mass burial and the state classifies the air as toxic. Another was the inspiration for a Julia Roberts movie. Here's the part the movie didn't show you. The contamination is still there, still spreading, and the town has almost ceased to exist. And at number 1, a place that was supposed to be proof that California could be different, a promise in the desert. What happened to it is one of the most methodical betrayals in state history. Hit subscribe, this is going to permanently change how you look at the Golden State. Number 10, Bombay Beach, California. Nobody warned the celebrities. In the 1950s and 1960s, Frank Sinatra partied here. The Beach Boys played along the shore, there were yacht clubs, motorboat races, vacation homes, and waterfront restaurants with views of California's largest lake. Bombay Beach was, by every measure of the era, a place people competed to reach. Today, Bombay Beach sits 227 feet below sea level on the southern end of the San Andreas Fault, in temperatures that exceed 115 degrees in summer. The population, according to the most recent census, is 295, and most of what those 295 people look out at is a shoreline of fish bones, salt crust, and ruins. The Salton Sea, the lake that made Bombay Beach, was never supposed to exist permanently. It formed accidentally in 1905 when an irrigation canal broke and the Colorado River flooded the Imperial Valley for nearly 2 years straight. What was supposed to be a resort economy became a closed-loop saline trap fed by agricultural runoff carrying fertilizers, pesticides, arsenic, and selenium. No outflow, no dilution, just accumulation. By the 1970s, the fish were dying in massive events. Millions of tilapia washing up on shore in waves of decomposition that could be smelled from miles away. By the 1980s and 1990s, the flooding came. Hurricane Kathleen in 1976 sent the sea surging 8 feet in 3 hours, swallowing whole neighborhoods that developers simply abandoned where they stood. Concrete foundations cracked. Vacation homes flooded and were never reclaimed. Streets ended in water and were eventually just left there, submerged and useless. And the families who stayed? They stayed. Some out of stubbornness, some because they had nowhere else to go. Some because they were elderly and the water-adjacent land, however poisoned, was what they owned. What you see when you drive into Bombay Beach today isn't just poverty. It's a specific kind of post-apocalyptic stillness. Rusted trailers sit adjacent to graffiti murals that artists began painting in the 2010s, when the place became cool to visit for exactly 1 afternoon before leaving. The beach itself is white with salt crystals and compressed fish skeleton. Dead birds line the waterline. The smell, on a hot day, which is most days, is hydrogen sulfide and organic decay. Scientists at Brown University published research in 2025 confirming that communities along the Salton Sea have been breathing air that exceeds California's safety standards for hydrogen sulfide for hundreds of hours per year, every year, for at least the past decade. The monitoring systems that were supposed to catch this were placed in the wrong locations and consistently measured the wrong data. The communities have been breathing poison in excess of legal limits, while the government's instruments told them everything was fine. Bombay Beach is what happens when the entire concept of resort town becomes a warning label. Number 9, Arvin, California. There's a specific way Arvin, California gets described in environmental documents. Phrases like top 15% statewide for overall CalEnviroscreen score, among the highest pollution burden census tracts in Kern County. Dry bureaucratic language for a simple, devastating fact. If you are a child growing up in Arvin, the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District has formally classified the air you breathe as among the dirtiest in the state, which isn't is itself among the dirtiest in the country. The San Joaquin Valley has failed to meet federal air quality standards for 25 consecutive years. Not missed by a little, failed, chronically, officially documented. While regulators produced management plans, the agricultural industry produced lobbying dollars, and children in Arvin produced hospitalizations. Compared to the national average, children in the San Joaquin Valley are twice as likely to be diagnosed with asthma before the age of 18. In communities like Arvin and the neighboring town of Lamont, a combined area of about 41,000 people, the census tracts rank in the worst 15% statewide on a combined index measuring PM 2.5 particulate exposure, ozone concentration, asthma rates, cardiovascular disease, low birth weight, poverty, educational barriers, and unemployment. That's not one bad number. That's the whole scorecard failing at once. The topography makes it worse. The mountains surrounding the valley act as a bowl, trapping emissions from diesel trucks on Highway 99, from agricultural burning, from irrigation equipment, from the concentrated animal feeding operations that dot the region. Winter inversions press the pollution layer low over the valley floor for weeks at a time. The EPA has assessed the repeated failure to attain health protective standards in this region costs approximately $6 billion annually in public health costs. That's the bill the region pays in emergency room visits, chronic disease management, and shortened lives. Most of that bill gets paid by the farm workers and their children who live here, work here, and have no mechanism to make it stop. Estela Escoto, who leads the Committee for a Better Arvin, said it plainly in 2023 when environmental advocates filed notice of intent to sue the Valley Air District. The people of Arvin have been forced to bear the brunt of public health harms, while the regulatory body that was created to protect them calculated compliance on paper while leaving the air the same. Number 8. East Porterville, California. In the summer of 2014, a woman named Yolanda Serrato went to the kitchen of her home in East Porterville, turned on the faucet, and nothing came out. Her well had gone dry. She wasn't alone. In the space of a few weeks, nearly 1,000 families in East Porterville, a community of about 7,500 people in Tulare County, lost access to running water entirely. This is California, 2014. Population centers an hour from Fresno. No water. What followed wasn't a quick fix. It was 21 months of people taking bucket showers, of a church called Iglesia Emanuel setting up portable showers that operated until 9 p.m. for anyone who needed them, of a woman named Donna Johnson who began delivering water to families out of her own pocket, eventually taking out loans to keep doing it, crying when she drove home at night because of what she had seen inside the houses, of children who wore the same clothes to school for days because washing them required water their family didn't have, of a man who admitted to a pastor that he went to a nearby park after dark to collect water from the duck pond because his family had nothing else. The cause wasn't a surprise. More than 75% of East Porterville residents are Latino. More than a third of families live below the poverty line. About 40% of adults never completed 9th grade. The community sits in the Central Valley, one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world, surrounded by farms that depend on the same depleted aquifers that were sucking the private wells dry. The county that leads the nation in agricultural sales watched its own residents lose running water and then spent months figuring out how to respond. Here's the part that follows like a slow nightmare. The state promised 3 new wells. By 2021, 7 years later, only one had been built. More than 450 households chose not to connect to a new city water system when it was finally extended. In July 2024, both functioning wells in a nearby community failed due to electrical problems. The contaminated backup well was brought back online because there was no other option. People were left, again, choosing between water they couldn't trust and no water at all. The State Water Board announced in 2024 that nearly 1 million more Californians had access to safe drinking water than 5 years prior. They announced this as a milestone. More than 735,000 Californians were still served by water systems that failed to meet state standards. East Porterville's story wasn't the exception, it was the template. Number 7. West Fresno, California. There's a highway in Fresno called Highway 99, and for decades it has functioned as something more than a road. It is is the border. On the east side of 99 is the Fresno that gets investment, development, restaurants, and grocery stores. On the west side is the Fresno that got redlined. In southwest Fresno's 93706 zip code, the area just west of the highway, over 41% of the population lives below the poverty line. The median household income is approximately $26,711. More than 40% of households rely on CalFresh food assistance. The community is 65% Latino and 14% Black, because that's how redlining worked. The city's housing policies of the mid-20th century pushed Black and Latino families to the west side of the highway and then systematically declined to fund it. Here's what that looks like in 2026. You can drive through West Fresno at midday and count liquor stores faster than you can count grocery stores, because there are virtually no grocery stores. One discount grocer for the entire area. Community advocates use the term food apartheid instead of food desert, because a desert is a natural phenomenon and this is not. This is the deliberate result of policy choices that made investment in this community economically unattractive, then left the consequences to the people who couldn't leave. And the consequences are biological. The Urban Institute ranked Fresno near the bottom of 274 American cities on economic and racial inclusion, last among 59 California cities. Life expectancy in Fresno's poorest neighborhoods can vary by up to 20 years compared with affluent neighborhoods on the other side of the same city. 20 years! The difference between a child in West Fresno and a child in Northeast Fresno isn't geography. It's the entire span between a young adult and a middle-aged one. It is, in every practical sense, two different countries sharing the same city limits. And West Fresno is still breathing the valley air. The same PM 2.5 concentration that has exceeded federal standards for a quarter century. The same asthma rates that are double the national average. The same chronic respiratory illness that follows children from their first wheeze at age 3 to a lifetime of emergency room visits. The food is bad and the air is toxic, and the investment never came and the highway is still there. Number 6. Kettleman City, California. In the fall of 2007, a woman named Maura Alatorre in Kettleman City, California went in for a prenatal checkup. 8 months into a routine pregnancy, her doctors told her the baby would be born with defects and would require a cesarean delivery. Her son, Emmanuel, was born with a cleft palate. She went looking for answers. What she found, along with other mothers in her town, was a pattern that shouldn't have been possible. Between September 2007 and November 2008, of 20 babies known to have been born in Kettleman City, 5 were born with cleft palates or lips. 3 of those children died. Across a slightly wider window, 2007 to 2010, 11 cases of severe birth defects were documented in a town of 1,500 people. Defects including missing brain parts, facial deformities, heart abnormalities, and limb defects. The California Department of Public Health investigated and found the rate of birth defects during 2008 to 2009 was higher than expected. They found no common cause. The case was officially inconclusive. 3.5 miles from the center of Kettleman City sits the Kettleman Hills facility, a 1,600-acre toxic waste landfill operated by Waste Management and permitted to hold up to 15 million tons of hazardous material. It is the largest toxic waste dump in the western United States. It accepts lead, arsenic, asbestos, mercury, and PCBs, chemicals directly linked to birth defects, developmental delays, and cancer. According to EPA records from 2007, that year the facility processed over 3 million pounds of lead compounds, nearly 2 million pounds of asbestos, and more than 118,000 pounds of arsenic. 400 truckloads of waste arrived daily. California's CalEnviroscreen 4.0 ranks Kettleman City among the communities in the state most burdened by pollution. High pesticide exposure, poor drinking water, asthma rates, cardiovascular disease, and poverty layered on top of each other in a 1,500-person town that has no sidewalks, no gutters, and a poverty rate approaching 30%. The unemployment rate, difficult to measure in small immigrant farming towns, is estimated higher than 82% of California communities. The mothers who held meetings and organized and testified in front of county boards and filed civil rights complaints got one thing: a 2016 federal mediation settlement requiring the state to comply with civil rights laws in permit and regulatory decisions statewide. The landfill is still there. It is still expanding. The state renewed the permit in 2023, and the investigation into whether that permit process discriminated against Latino residents relied on interviews with agency employees, not with the residents of Kettleman City. Maura Alatorre's son Emmanuel is a teenager teenager now. The dump is still 3.5 miles away. Number 5. Mecca in North Shore, California. You can get from Palm Springs, California to the community of Mecca in about 35 minutes. From a city with Michelin-starred restaurants, luxury spas, and a median household income above $65,000, you drive southeast into the Coachella Valley, past the date farms and greenhouse operations, past the point where the tourist amenities stop appearing, and you arrive at a place where 23% of households live below the poverty line, most residents are Latino farm workers, and the air has been, as confirmed by Brown University and UCLA researchers publishing in 2025, systematically more toxic than California's legal safety standards, month after month, year after year, for more than a decade. The culprit is the Salton Sea, California's largest lake, which sits at the center of one of the worst environmental crises in the American West. The sea is shrinking. As its shoreline retreats, it exposes a lakebed saturated with decades of agricultural runoff, heavy metals, selenium, pesticide residue, which then dries into fine particulate dust and lifts into the air every time the wind moves, which is often. The lake also releases hydrogen sulfide, the same gas responsible for the rotten egg smell you'd associate with a sewer malfunction, at levels that researchers in 2025 confirmed exceeded California's hourly exposure standards for hundreds of hours per year. Torres Martinez, the monitoring site closest to the shore, recorded more than 250 hours per month of hydrogen sulfide exceedances every August for over 10 years straight. But here's the thing, the government sensors that were supposed to be tracking this were placed in the wrong locations. The actual concentrations reaching homes, reaching children, reaching the schools where teachers report elevated absences every summer, those numbers were never being accurately measured. The monitoring gap wasn't an accident. The communities closest to the shoreline, overwhelmingly poor, overwhelmingly Latino, overwhelmingly without the political capital to demand accurate measurement, had their toxic exposure systematically undercounted. The Salton Sea region has pediatric asthma rates more than double the national average. Emergency departments in Imperial County treat 3 times more pediatric asthma visits than the rest of California. Nearly 1 in 4 children in some communities has been diagnosed with asthma. A University of California Riverside study confirmed the sea itself is responsible for lung inflammation in the surrounding population. The fish are gone. The birds are leaving. The children are at the hospital. 35 minutes from a luxury resort town. Number 4. Hinckley, California. Most people know Hinckley through a movie. Julia Roberts won an Academy Award playing a woman who helped expose what Pacific Gas and Electric did here. The studio built sets, designed the period wardrobe, recreated the desert town as a backdrop for a legal thriller. The film ends with the settlement, $333 million, the largest payout ever awarded in a direct action lawsuit in American history at the time. The lights come up, justice is served. Here's what the credits didn't tell you. From 1952 to 1966, PG&E dumped approximately 370 million gallons of hexavalent chromium contaminated wastewater into unlined ponds adjacent to its compressor station outside Hinckley. The chemical seeped directly into the aquifer. PG&E knew. They didn't tell the water board until 1987, more than 20 years after the dumping stopped. Residents developed cancer, tumors, reproductive problems. Families reported clustered illnesses that they couldn't explain for years, while PG&E internally monitored what they had done and said nothing. The settlement paid out in 1996. PG&E began buying up properties near the contamination plume. Residents sold one by one over the next decade. Some moved away with settlement money. Others, like Roberta Walker, moved to the edge of the valley specifically to escape the plume, and then found years later that the plume had followed them. Her new wells tested positive for chromium-6. She called Aaron Brockovich directly. Matter of life or death, I need you to call me. By 2016, the New York Times described Hinckley as having slowly become a ghost town. And it has. Chromium-6 levels in the groundwater today remain in some wells at 2,500 times the state's safety standard. PG&E's cleanup has removed approximately 89% of the estimated contaminant. A number that sounds reassuring until you understand that 11% of 370 million gallons is still an incomprehensible volume of poison that has been migrating through the aquifer for 70 years. A local resident who has been living near the plume described it in 2024 to the Washington Post as, "Still going on, and it's not going to be taken care of in our lifetime." The movie had a triumphant ending. The real town doesn't have an ending at all. It barely has a town. Number 3. McFarland, California. McFarland, California is a name most people recognize now because of a Disney movie about a cross-country running team. Feel-good sports drama. Underdog farm worker kids from a tough town who discover they're fast. The state championship. The hugs. The credits. What the Disney movie understandably skipped was this. The California Department of Public Health confirmed that McFarland suffered from a childhood cancer rate 3 to 4 times higher than normal. The state confirmed it. Not activists, not worried parents. The California Department of Health Services. 3 to 4 times the expected rate of childhood cancer in a small agricultural town in Kern County. The investigation found that, prior to 1990, there was significant underreporting of the amounts of restricted pesticides applied in the region. Pesticides that included known carcinogens. That underreporting, the state acknowledged, stymied efforts to identify the exact environmental causes. In other words, the state confirmed the cancer cluster, confirmed the probable role of carcinogenic pesticides, confirmed that years of insufficient regulation and data suppression made it impossible to prove the chain of causation tightly enough to hold anyone fully accountable, and that was approximately where the accountability ended. McFarland sits in the San Joaquin Valley, surrounded by fields that produce the food that stocks American grocery stores from coast to coast. The town's residents are overwhelmingly Latino farm workers and their families. People who work in those fields, who live within the drift radius of what gets sprayed on them, who breathe the air that settles over the town after application season. The region has been out of compliance with EPA air quality standards for 25 years. The water systems serving farm worker communities have some of the highest contamination violation rates in the state. And the pesticide that's now at the center of active litigation, a soil fumigant called 1,3-D, used extensively throughout the Central Valley, has been confirmed at levels above California's lifetime cancer risk threshold by every one of the 6 state air monitors deployed in the region. On January 1st, 2024, the state implemented a regulation setting the acceptable exposure level for residential bystanders at 14 times higher than the state's official cancer risk threshold. 14 times. When farm worker advocates challenged this in court in early 2026, Bianca Santoyo of the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment said clearly, this regulation would protect no one. The kids in that Disney movie are adults now. Some of them probably have kids of their own in McFarland. Nobody made a sequel about that. Number 2. Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, California. There is a neighborhood in Los Angeles, less than 5 miles from downtown, where a battery recycling plant operated for 93 years. 93 years of processing 25,000 lead-acid batteries per day. 93 years of emitting lead, arsenic, and other heavy metals into the air and soil of a neighborhood that is over 90% Latino, one of the most densely populated communities in the city. The plant was the Exide Technologies facility in Vernon. It opened in 1922. It closed under criminal investigation, cutting a deal with federal prosecutors to avoid charges in 2015. At the time it was shut down, the South Coast Air Quality Management District had already determined it posed a higher cancer risk to more people than any of the 450 operations the agency had regulated in the previous 25 years. It had logged at least 88 violations of emission standards between 1996 and 2015 alone. The EPA found it violated the Clean Air Act more than 30 times under new standards that took effect in 2014. Then came the cleanup. The state identified over 10,100 properties within a 1.7-mile radius that may need remediation. As of 2025, California has spent approximately $772 million on the cleanup, plus an additional $67 million for parkway cleaning, and has treated roughly 5,900 of those properties. That means more than 4,000 properties remain at levels above the EPA's stated threshold of 80 parts per million of lead in soil. Some of those properties tested above 1,000 parts per million, the level at which soil is classified as hazardous waste. Monsignor John Moretta of Resurrection Catholic Church in Boyle Heights confirmed to journalists in 2024 that 4 of his neighbors had died of cancer in recent years. A man named Gonzalez, who lives outside the cleanup radius, had 5 dogs die of cancer, then developed cancer himself, which had spread from his skin to his back and face. His property measured 170 parts per million of lead in the soil. He didn't make the remediation list. California allocated $772 million and is halfway through. The EPA is evaluating whether to put the site on the federal Superfund list, a process that began in 2024. The state has been cleaning this up since 2018. 7 years in, half done, 4,000 families still waiting. In 2015, when the plant closed and the full scope of contamination became clear, a Teresa Marquez, who had built her home in Boyle Heights for her family, specifically so her grandchildren could come play in the dirt, found out her yard was contaminated with lead. She told reporters, "Do you know how much that hurts me? It hurts." She built a home for grandchildren to play in the dirt. Her grandchildren cannot play in the dirt. That's 93 years of operations plus 7 years of cleanup, plus 4,000 more properties still waiting, plus a woman who can't let her grandchildren touch her own yard. Number 1. Allensworth, California. In 1908, a man named Colonel Allen Allensworth founded a town in Tulare County, California, on an idea so radical for its time that it required purchasing an entire piece of desert to prove it was possible. The idea was this: that Black Americans, freed from slavery less than 50 years prior, could build a self-governing, self-sufficient community that owed nothing to white landowners, white employers, or white institutions. They would own the land. They would run the schools, the courts, the farms, and the economy. They would be proof. Families came from across the country. They built homes, planted alfalfa, established a library, a school, a church, a justice court, a post office, a baseball team. The town held dances and debates. It published its own newspaper. It sent children to college. By 1914, Allensworth was thriving, and then the water company built 4 wells. Not for Allensworth, for the neighboring white town of Alpaugh. Alpaugh got 10 wells. Allensworth got 4. The wells for Allensworth began drying up almost immediately. The Pacific Water Company, which had sold the settlers on the promise of adequate water infrastructure, simply didn't build it and moved on. The California Reparations Task Force, in its 2023 report, named this directly. The settlers of Allensworth were victims of a racist scam and were sold land that would never have enough water. In 1914, the Southern Pacific Railroad moved a nearby train stop, eliminating the freight shipments that had been sustaining the town's economy. Without the railroad, without reliable water, families began to leave. By mid-century, Allensworth had dwindled to almost nothing. What had been the first all-black self-governing town in California became a near ghost. Then a state park commemorating what had been. A community still exists near the original town site today. About 600 residents, predominantly Latino farm workers who moved into the area in subsequent decades. And here is where the story refuses to end on any comfortable note. In 2024, photos published by Cow Matters showed a woman named Sherry Hunter pouring bottled water into a cup to brush her teeth in her own home. Hunter serves on the local water board. The water coming out of Allensworth's public wells is contaminated with arsenic, a naturally occurring element worsened by decades of groundwater overpumping in the San Joaquin Valley to irrigate the same agricultural fields that employed the community's residents. One of Allensworth's wells consistently exceeds state health limits for arsenic. Drinking arsenic-contaminated water over time causes cancer, has been linked to fetal deaths and malformations, and impairs the developing brains of children. For years, the only arsenic-free water in the entire community came from a small spigot in the center of town, 2 solar panels drawing moisture from the air through a system built with grant funding and volunteer labor, while the State Water Board, according to the state auditor's own report, demonstrated a lack of urgency in helping failing rural water systems. In January 2026, after years of advocacy, a new well and arsenic treatment system were finally unveiled in Allensworth, funded by a $3.8 million grant. Community leaders gathered, roosters crowed. A water board official said, "Survival is never easy in the face of inequity and lack of support." This is where we are. The town was founded in 1908 as proof that Black Americans could build something that couldn't be taken from them. The water company took it. The railroad took it. The aquifer gave them arsenic. The state took until 2026 to install an adequate well. And the people who still live there, a different community now, a different set of families, but people in the same place, brushed their teeth with bottled water in 2024 in the state with the 5th largest economy on Earth. Allensworth gets number 1 not because its numbers are the worst on this list. It gets gets number 1 because it is the most complete story of how California handles communities it has decided are acceptable to sacrifice. This was not neglect. Neglect is passive. What happened in Allensworth started with an active decision to sell land without adequate water, and has continued through every decade since with the active decision to keep not fixing it. 116 years later, they finally built a well. If this changed how you see this state, if you learned something here that you can't unknow, hit like and subscribe. There are more places like these, and they exist whether we look at them or not.